So this instrument takes a little while to explain. It started as a budget Stratocaster I converted into a 3-string bass, with a secret piezo pickup installed under the bridge to further conduct a series of videos testing alternative string ideas that the magnetic pickups might not be able to pick up. Sometime later, having 3 empty machine head holes still at the headstock, I decided to indulge my curiosity adding 3 more coursed octave strings, adjusting the nut and saddles to accommodate regular strings again. And that's where we left off, more or less. But if you've seen some of those other videos, you'd know there's still plenty to do, with other ideas to try and things to attempt again that maybe we debated in the comments. Hopefully any confusion you may still have will be cleared up as we go, or maybe you might like to do some refreshing first with some video links in the description. This is Kevin from Said Too Much. The biggest upgrade to start with is to finally get rid of those single coil pickups. My first replacement choice was a simple 6-string humbucker for less noise and a warmer guitar type tone. Just like those single coils, the strings actually pass equally between 2 poles instead of directly over them, since they're in 3 sets of 2. But this really wasn't an issue before. They're still well into the magnetic field, and each string should be equal volume just depending on how we set the pickup height. For my next choice, I wanted something more appropriate for a bass tone, and what's more traditional than P-bass pickups? The strings are supposed to go between the poles for these, but unlike the divisible 6, the 3 sets of 2 now have to be divided among 8. There might be some volume disparity comparing the 2 ends to the middle, but again, according to how we set the pickup heights, we might be able to manipulate this if it becomes a big issue. The humbucker already fit into the bridge position of the body cavity, but I had a little bit of marking and routing to do for the P-bass pickup with its significant width, deciding it should go somewhere between the neck and middle positions. And no longer fitting within the confines of a normal Stratocaster pickguard, I had to do a little bit of improvising for the new design as well, something with a little more Telecaster style thrown in it. I had to print it out in 2 pieces due to the size of the printer, initially thinking I would just glue them together. But rushing into things, I mounted the humbucker easily to the smaller bottom half, and mounted the P-bass pickup directly to the body like normal, being able to align everything perfectly up in the new cutout while still being able to access its output and ground wires. After manipulating the 2 halves in real life, I decided I liked the idea of it being compartmentalized, and decided not to glue them. With a few pilot holes to add for the new pickguard shape, it looks better than expected. Just in hindsight, leaving it in 2 pieces maybe should have meant placing mounting screws closer to the 4 corners to hold it down, but this still decently holds. Now, starting from that first video, the middle pickup had always been cut out of the loop, only being left in the pickguard for aesthetic reasons, and being replaced by the piezo pickup. But as we learned over the course of the next consecutive installments, the signal was much weaker than the magnetic ones, and often overwhelmed by them in the blended positions. So for the next upgrade, I figured we could use an active preamp piezo system, like something on my actual acoustic. Something so much like it with its relatively small electronics box that I just decided to steal it. I tried to think of a spot on the pickguard for the control box, but conceded to install it just below the bridge instead. This decision obviously required me to mark and route out a substantial depth on top of extra room for 3 cables to pass underneath. So I was a little worried about it having to be deeper than its actual thickness, but it presented no difficulty. I even perfectly drilled 3 holes to the floor of the new cavity practically blind, leading to the tremolo cavity, which now acts as the housing for the 9V and letting the actual piezo pickup come up to the top the same way the last one did. Drilling just a slightly bigger hole for the output and ground combo wire, we can take our attention back to the top. The piezo isn't stiff like the passive one, so I thought it might benefit us to rig a system trying to keep it flush against the surface with an even pressure distribution, using some scrap wood I Sharpied black and electrical tape. Getting the saddles to push down against it, not actually being flush against the body at the front end, I was relieved the crude setup worked well enough. Until I realized I almost forgot to ground the bridge. Maybe even more crude looking now, but covering everything up with some electrical tape like we've been doing, I could move on to testing the more important wiring. Initially, I crossed my fingers hoping I could just use that 5-way selector switch to have the 3 pickups soloed, along with the 2 additional blends of the passives with the 1 active. But I was wrong. I got weird audio dips, and I regret thinking I could do this in the first place. So thinking of the simplest solution, I went with a toggle switch just before the output jack for a hard cut between an active and passive system. The active being the Piezo preamp alone, which has its own volume boost knob with built-in tuner and minor effects, and the passive system being both the guitar and bass pickups routed to 1 blend pot, then through your traditional volume tone setup. So the middle tone knob is actually the blend, which technically affects tone, so it's not lying. This also meant I needed a new toggle switch to put in place of the 5-way switch, and short of wasting plastic on a newly designed bottom half pickguard, I just impatiently drilled it out by hand. Stringing it up to get to the demo, I actually made one last upgrade. Previously, I used 3D printed saddles for the 2 courses of strings to rest at once, but they would often slip forward from the tension of the strings coming from the bottom. So the simple solution was actually to just go back to using the original saddles that had a simple hex screw to solve this problem. All I really needed to do was use some scrap wood for just that one little part. I could just sand to whatever action height I need. Talk about over-engineering. And finally, one last thing to at least quick attempt again that we kind of failed at in the past is to use nylon strings as the octave strings. Muting them to play normal bass lines or notes only requires you to switch to the passive magnetic system instead of some mechanical left-hand work. The toggle switch doubles as a sort of on-off for those octave strings. Instead of trying to explain it some more, I'll just jump into playing the thing, and I'm sure you'll catch on. I just at least wanted to start with this idea. So what do y'all think? Are we done with upgrades and additions now? What would you even call this thing? I actually had a hard time trying to come up with a title for this video, considering all the other titles I've used to try to describe it in the past. I mean, we have a bass pickup, guitar pickup, and piezo pickup, with both nylon strings and metal strings. Would this just be called the ultimate hybrid? Either way, I'm impressed with it, and it's a ton of fun to play if you guys could only get it in your hands. Now, I hate to say I'm unsatisfied with this instrument, but even after all of this, I think there are maybe a few changes to try. First might be to figure out a way to solo the nylon strings like we can the metal ones, and maybe find a way to reduce the extraneous noises and harshness from the piezo, other than using noise gates and low-pass filters. I'd kinda like to try different tunings, and maybe even incorporate some of those weird alternative string ideas that actually ended up sounding pretty interesting. So just let me know if you guys really want yet another video on this instrument. Maybe focusing on your own tuning or wiring ideas, or anything else I haven't even thought of yet. My mind is swimming and I just keep thinking about it, even though I really did think this would be the completion of its journey. For now though, enough said. For early video access, raw instrument tracks, and more exclusives, find our community on Patreon and consider adding your support.
Said too much.